Today's lecture is part of the ongoing series on the English essay. As you would have noticed in the previous lectures, that how this the English essay is another genre that we have taken up for discussion, just as we have talked about poetry, short stories, novels, etc. So this is yet another form of expression which flourished in the English canon in the 18th century. So in these lectures, we are we are engaging with not just this form of expression, but we are also looking at different people or writers who are associated with the English essay, because they played a seminal role in establishing, not only establishing this genre, but also they served as precursors to the other important genres such as novels, which came after this. So that's why it's important for us to understand the English essay, because not only was it a precursor for various other genres, but at the same time it also introduced a lot of I would say significant features in English literature, and one of the foremost of those being the faculty to think critically, to analyze critically, right? So that's what we have been discussing in all these lectures, and today's lecture is is a part of this series where we are going to discuss Daneil Defoe and the English essay. I know that when you hear of this name, it might bring a question to your mind: Defoe and essay, right? Because that is something which is not very commonly talked about, and that's precisely the reason why we are going to discuss it today. Because conventionally, Daneil Defoe as an author, we know him as foremost as a novelist, right? But if you read a bit more about him and his writings and his contributions, you will understand that his contribution went much beyond merely novel per se, right? So that is why in today's lecture we thought of discussing Defoe's contribution to the English essay, and of course then we'll also connect it with the other references that you have that you would have already come across in this series, right? Now the next thing that I say is that and if you're if you've been following it sequentially, if you've been following the series sequentially, you would have listened to lectures on the Tatler, on the Spectator by Addison and Steele, and in fact any student of literature is aware of these terms, right? Because the moment we talk about the essay form, these names come to mind, right? So it is widely known that Addison and Steele are the two seminal names which mark the beginning of the English essay. But as I just said, that there were writers before and around the same time who also contributed to this genre. And today we are going to talk about one such lesser known writer, lesser known not in the general sense, but vis-a-vis the English essay, that is Daneil Defoe. Now you see, Daneil Defoe was born in 1660, and he was around up until 1731, so which means that he is a late 17th and early 18th century writer. He is most famous for his novel Robinson Crusoe. A lot of us would have read it, if not read it, would have heard about it, but we know also Defoe as a very prolific and a versatile writer, right? He produced more than 300 works that included books, pamphlets and journals on diverse topics including politics, crime, religion, marriage, psychology and the supernatural. So you see, that is something which is a defining feature of Defoe, that he was very versatile, right? So not just writing novels, but he also wrote pamphlets, journals, and that too on varied, diverse topics. So now you see on your screen, that is Daneil Defoe, the author in discussion today. And the other thing, now quickly connecting Defoe to the topic in discussion, is that how Daneil Defoe has sometimes also been described as the predecessor of Steele, right? Now, why is it that? Why do we call him the predecessor of Steele? Now, you see, that is because the critics believe that the germ of the literary form that is found in Defoe's review was actually laid the basis for the coming on of the essay form as well, right? But what is also said is that that the review, Defoe's review contains little more than just the germ. Now, the essayist may be distinguished from the journalist and the political pamphleteer, but Defoe was, as an essayist, a lot more, right? Now, because you see, now these are three terms that we are using. He used to write journals, pamphlets, political pamphlets, and essays. Now, you see, all these three are forms of expression which are non-fiction, okay? But what sets apart an essay from the other two is that it comprises, it has a little more, I would say, freedom, creative freedom, as compared to the other two, right? Because in an essay, the writer, can also create a character that becomes a mouthpiece for the author to express the views, to express observations around, etc. Right? So we see that Defoe is then, very often seen as the predecessor of Steele by a lot of critics. Now, as the essayist, Defoe's fame must rest principally on the 2 volumes of miscellaneous writings that were disinterred from forgotten journals by his biographer William Lee. Now, you see, because that's a very common question to come in your mind, that how come? Because we have not really heard of Defoe's essays, then how are we calling him a predecessor of Steele? Yes, those writings were not very well known, right? So I would suggest that, somebody who's then maybe doing a research in this area, for them this becomes an important point of analysis, because this is a gap in our existing discussions, where we do not talk about Defoe's contributions as much, right? So principally then the 2 volumes of miscellaneous writings that were from the forgotten journals, and they were procured by Defoe's biographer William Lee, become the sources for us to access this writing done by Defoe. And the contents of these volumes, they range from the year 1716 to 1729, after both the Tatler and the Spectator had run their course. Okay, so that's around the time that we see these writings are dated, and so clearly, while Defoe did exist, before Addison and Steele, but he was still doing the work, and what he wrote somewhat coincided with the other 2 very famous essayists, right? So now, in Defoe's own words, in the preface to the 8th volume of the review, he best describes his life, And let's look at this quote, for us to really understand that what kind of an essayist exactly was Defoe. Because you see, the way an individual or a writer, or whatever circumstances have shaped the writer's thoughts and ideas, we see that reflected even in their writings as well. So, before we go on to discussing his contribution in the review, let's understand that what Defoe himself talks about his own life in the review. And I quote, he says, "I have gone through a life of wonders and am the subject of a vast variety of providences. I have been fed more by miracle than Elijah, when the ravens were his purveyors. I have some time ago summoned up the scenes of my life in this dish," and he quotes himself again, "no man has tasted differing fortunes more, and 13 times I have been rich and poor." Now, we'll just pause over here for a bit, and then we will look at the other part of the quote. Now, what is he trying to say? How is Defoe describing his life? He says that he would like to call his life a life of wonders instead of providences, right? He says that I have been fed more by the miracles than by Elijah. Now, Elijah, is I would say he's using this figure to talk about the divine authority. So he says that my life has been more full of miracles instead of being driven by divine, purpose and guidance. So, and it's been full of wonders. It's a life of wonders. So, which means what? The life that he lived was not ordinary, right? There were a lot of things that happened which were unexpected, even to himself, but well, they did happen to him, right? And what were these miracles? What were these unexpected things, that he could possibly be talking about? We get a slight sense of it, when he tries to sum up the scenes of his life in this quote. He says, "No man has tasted differing fortunes more, and 13 times I have been rich and poor." So, this shows that his life has had its fair amount of ups and downs. Differing fortunes, it means sometimes he was comfortable, sometimes he was struggling, and struggling very, very much. And as he says, 13 times I have been rich and poor. So, which means that his life was, defined by many twists and turns, and is not really a very linear, predictable life. So, for a man like that who has lived such a life, what his writing style would be, because you see, in the essays, what do? In the essays, they capture what they see, what they observe around them. So, for somebody that has had such a life, I'm sure you will understand that even their writings would have that edge, particularly in the form of the essay, where we see that the author, shares their insights into society, into the times, and into different topics and issues that are of prime importance at the given point. Right? Now, let us look at the second half of the quote now. He says, in the school of affliction, affliction means again, a lot of a struggle and hard times. I have learnt more philosophy than at the academy. Now, you see, this is a very interesting part of the quote. He's saying that it is in suffering that I have learnt more philosophy than in school or than at the university. That's been the real teacher for him, suffering, right? So, in the school of affliction, I have learnt more philosophy than at the academy, and more divinity than from the pulpit. Once again, he says, I have learned about God in suffering, in my actual lived experiences, that I've understood God, instead of learning about God in the church. So, not in the universities, not in the church did I become philosophical and spiritual, but instead it's in the life circumstances, it's as he says, in the difference of fortunes that he really understood life. In prison, I had learnt to know that liberty does not consist in open doors. I have seen the rough side of the world as well as the smooth, and have in less than half a year tasted the difference between the closet of a king and the dungeon of Newgate. Unquote. Now, once again, very powerful lines. He says, I've seen life as smooth, and at the same time, I've also seen the rough side of the world. Right? So, the opposites really defined his experience. And towards the end, he says that I have also seen the closet of a king. Closet of a king means that he has experienced luxury from very close quarters. So, and on the other hand, he has also experienced the dungeon of Newgate. As students of literature, you would know that Newgate is one of the very famous, prisons, right? So, he says that I have known luxury, and at the same time, I have also known the deprivation, the privation of a prison as well. So, now you see a man with that kind of an experience behind him of having lived life. His writings are bound to be full of insights, full of ideas, full of thoughts about not just society, but at the same time about various other topics or things that he chooses to write about. So, you see with this little now, and to remind you that this quotation where Defoe talks about himself appears in the review itself, right? Now, I know we have been mentioning review since the beginning of the lecture, but well, what actually is the review is a question that you must be waiting for me to answer, right? So, deliberately, we held that information back, and now we'll come to the review itself. So, you see, before I tell you about the review, just a very quick recap. So, what we have seen is that how Daneil Defoe, primarily, who's a very famous novelist, but at the same time was also a pamphleteer, was also a journalist. He also wrote the essays as well. He is known to be the predecessor of Steele, the very famous Addison and Steele, who are the two names who are associated with the periodical essays of the 18th century. But Daneil Defoe did not really I would say flourish as much as an essayist, but well, his contributions are important for us to take a look at, to take cognizance of, if we are to really understand this writing style as well. The third thing that we said about Defoe is that this point is important, particularly for those interested in researching the non-fiction or the English essay, because Defoe's essays were not very easily accessible. So that's why critics have tried their best to understand this aspect of Defoe's literary contribution as well. And the last thing that we discussed was a bit about Defoe himself. What kind of a life did he live? What kind of a worldview did he have, so that we understand what shapes his writings? And we saw this little snippet from his work, that is review. Right now, having established this, we come to the question that's been looming large: what is the review? Right now, the full title of this work is Review of the Affairs of France. Now, of his astonishingly voluminous writings, the greater part of Defoe's work belongs to the political pamphlets or the ephemeral journalism, right? And yet there remains a trace of the essay character, right? For example, in the review that I just now mentioned, that is, the review of the affairs of France. This is that work where we see Defoe experiment with the style of the essay. He is not writing political pamphlet here, he is not writing in a journalistic style, but he is experimenting with the essay form, right. So, there are a few things in literature that are more astonishing than Defoe's review of the affairs of France. Now, there are over 5,000 pages of the review, all written by hand of Defoe. Right now, it points towards what, another thing, that how the review was also as voluminous as his other works, 5,000 pages, right? And it is little known, as I just now mentioned, because it is almost inaccessible, because there were very few copies available. In fact, a few critics even mentioned that there was just one copy available of the review, right? I mean, which is the copy that survived, right? So at first, so you see, that is the reason why it's not very often talked about when we talk about the essay, okay? But it's always good to understand something that existed and played its part in the genre. So you see, at first the review appeared weekly, then twice, and later still thrice a week. Now, if you remember from the previous lectures of ours, we said that when we were discussing the English essay, we said that it's a periodical essay. Periodical means that it appears after a fixed duration. So, likewise, in the same way, the review initially appeared weekly, then twice, and then later even thrice a week, right. Now, what was the purpose? Now, you see, we've discussed before this that the purpose of the English essay was where the writers wanted to correct the wrongs in society, to analyze society, to also at the same time educate people, educate them not in terms of making them literate, but instead making them aware of their follies, so that they are able to correct their wrongs. The purpose also was commentary, political commentary. Sometimes, as we were discussing in our last lecture, if you remember, on Elizabeth Heywood, sometimes these essays also delved into people's personal lives, giving us a view of the social history of the time. So that's broadly what the essay would do in 18th century. And then now the review's principal purpose was to bring before the English people the thoughts of Defoe on international politics and the non-commerce. Now, this was particularly the intent with which he wrote the review. And if you go back to the title, it says Review of the Affairs of France, right? Now, clearly, Defoe, being an English writer, is naming his work as a review of France, or as a review of the affairs of France, tells us that it's not just about France, but at the same time it's international politics, as we just now said. That was the purpose for him to write this particular work, which was incredibly voluminous, right? Now, did he stop short at only discussing international politics, or did it have more? Because you see, an essay is supposed to cater to more topics and themes than just discussing politics, right? So that we are going to discuss in the next half of the lecture, where we will once again delve at length into what the review did, what are the areas that it covered, and then most importantly, how was it connected with or different from Addison Steele's publication as well. Because you see, whenever we talk about the essay, we think about Addison and Steele, we think about the Spectator and the Tatler. It's always good to also have a comparative analysis. So for the comparative, I would suggest keep in mind Daneil Defoe's The Review. Thank you.